Diversify Our Narrative is a student coalition that advocates and works to create dialogue regarding race and identity within student bodies, taking action towards educational, racial, and community equity. And the Journals of Justice is a global youth-led 501c3 organization that educates youth on social issues, encouraging students to serve, lead, and manifest justice in their communities through writing and creativity.
This panel is just the beginning. Starting in May, we'll be launching the Dawn x JOJ Tackling Journalism for Social Justice theme series, Dawn and JOJ, partnered on this free series to help youth deepen their commitment to justice and advocacy via different avenues of self-expression, particularly through journalism and artistic mediums. Throughout the series, we'll explore what it means to manifest justice across various topics, find the words to write about pressing human rights issues, and empower ourselves and others by sharing our voices.
Today, we are pleased to have a panel of organizations that advocate for the youth voice, including Zenerations, GENup, Dear Asian Youth, Afro Puff Chronicles, and Diversify Our Narrative.
So now I would like to invite these organizations to please introduce themselves.
Hi guys, my name is Tyler Newman. I am the founder and executive director of Afro Puff Chronicles, which was founded in 2018. Afro Puff Chronicles is a Gen Z-led media company that is basically inspiring Gen Z and girls of color through art and writing. And we do a lot of infographics on Instagram and a lot of work through our YouTube as well.
Hi everyone, super excited to be here today. I'm Stephanie, I use she, her pronouns, and Dear Asian Youth is an organization that I founded, and what it does is, well, we're basically just centered around Asian activism, and we do that through a variety of ways, whether that be through, our literature, our media, our podcast, or our chapter program.
Hi guys, I'm Judy. I also use she, her pronouns. I am the Director of Education for Diversify Our Narrative, which is an organization founded in June of 2020. And a lot of the work that I do and the work that our organization does is really focusing on anti-racist liberatory education and really making sure that BIPOC students are able to feel as if their experiences and narratives are being heard and represented in the classroom.
My name's Alvin. I use he, him, his pronouns, and I'm part of the leadership of GENup. And we really focus on engaging youth in education advocacy and education policy. So we've done a lot of different initiatives, but a lot of our advocacy really centers on school board policy at a local level, as well as state policy at a state level. So we've done some work with Diversify Our Narrative on ethnic studies, and we also have done a lot of other cool mental health work at a district level. And we do a lot of work as well in terms of empowering and engaging student board members on school boards of education. So really excited to be here today.
Hi, I'm Kaya. I'm the Director of Outreach at Zenerations. And Zenerations is a youth-led, completely Gen Z nonprofit media group that aims to empower and educate the changemakers and the creatives of Gen Z through our articles, infographics, and project initiatives. And today is also actually our 1-year anniversary.
Hi, I'm Kristine. I'm from the JOJ, or the Journals of Justice, and I'm a co-president and the editor-in-chief of our organization.
Hi, I'm Julianna. I'll be your other moderator today, and I am the Director of Outreach and Fellowships for Dawn. Okay, so our very first question is, what does it mean to empower youth, especially in such a digital era where individuals are more aware of what's happening in the world and eager to get involved, and why is that important?
For Dear Asian Youth, at least, empowering youth for us really means just letting Asian youth know that they have a voice in our organization, that they have a spot here, that after years of perhaps not seeing themselves represented in the media, not seeing them represented in people that they look up to, and their careers that they want to go to, that they can finally have a space where they can come and confidently know that at the end of the day, they know that their voice will be listened to, and that their voice will also be showcased on our platform. So I think really just empowering youth means, sharing people's stories. That's something that we always strive to do at Dear Asian Youth, is lending people those like tools and resources, giving them an opportunity where they can, I guess, like hear themselves, and also, you know, like whether that be submitting their pieces through like our literature and seeing their own pieces surrounding Asian identity being published on our website. I think things like that is really just like letting them know that they have a spot here.
I think social media and like just digital media in general has been really powerful in terms of supporting and engaging a lot of grassroots activism and grassroots organizing at a local level. I think the two really have to go hand in hand, and if you mesh the two really well, it can be really great. You know, for example, like take the last 3 years, there's been so much student advocacy and student lobbying, for example, going on in Sacramento, and you actually have students, you know, sometimes going to lobby days in Sacramento, other times, you know, just calling into different assembly and senate education committees to voice their support for different bills going through the legislature. And, you know, like 8-9 years ago, like that's something that was very, very rare. And so I think it's been really awesome and empowering how digital media, because, you know, everyone has like an Instagram these days and they have access to all these different organizations that are doing all of this great organizing work. I think it's been really easy to connect students with that kind of direct action and creating that link and bridge between the two.
So moving on to our next question, what are some of the most powerful tools youth have at their disposal? And how can we better engage with them to create a more equitable future as youth ourselves and just as members of initiatives and organizations such as these?
That's such a great question. I honestly think that social media and the internet is probably two of the most powerful tools that we have at our disposal. I think that we are most connected than we have ever been, and I feel like that's a really that's a big superpower for Gen Z especially. I think that through the internet we can learn more about people from different places around the world, people that come from different backgrounds than us. In addition to that, we can also learn more about what's going on in the world, right? So we can learn about current events, ways that we can kind of all kind of pull together and combat different social justice issues or social issues in general. I think that social media has made it really better so that we can organize together and really make real change. I think that the way that we can make these platforms more accessible as well is to of course, expand those resources so that more people can join the conversation, but also spotlighting different BIPOC creators or people that are sharing and distributing this this information and doing these, especially like lobbying and a lot of social justice work. I think just spotlighting those people and giving them much more support is really powerful and important this time.
So our next question is, social media is now one of the most useful tools for youth to engage with, to promote awareness and show solidarity through the use of hashtags, posts, stories, campaigns, etc., etc. How can we move past performative activism to create genuine policy and social change?
Yeah, so Zenerations actually we put in a lot of thought behind not being performative activists. And I would say that educating yourself, like truly educating yourself outside of social media is so important. And reading books and learning from the activists of the past, everyone who came before us, really helps us gain a better understanding of what we're advocating for and how we can do better. Because youth have always had a voice in social justice. Like we can see this from back in the 50s, 60s, 70s. And I think it's really important for us as Gen Z to learn about what they all did and how we can improve upon that to continue to advocate for social justice. And in other terms, also, in other words, my bad, these are very repeated ideas, but contacting your lawmakers through organized efforts really does make a difference because it shows them that their constituents do care about certain topics and they want to make a change. So I think it really comes down to signing petitions directly from the government and calling and emailing your legislators to let them know that you do care about these topics and you want them to fix what they are doing in order to make our lives better. And in regards to social change as well, it's probably best to start at the smallest scale and then get wider, because you can start within your family and friends. Educate yourself and then educate the people around you and then expand outwards. Because once you've educated yourself, you can help educate everyone who knows you. And then slowly and slowly, bit by bit, the viewpoints of your community will change. And then you will have a growing community of people that agrees with your ideas that, hey, the youth have a voice and the youth want people to be equal. And in addition, always donate to mutual aid if it's possible for you to, because that really helps the people who are most impacted by certain events. So mutual aid, education, and contact your lawmakers. That's the best way to avoid performative activism.
Yeah, I definitely want to echo everything that Kaya said. I think that because we are, especially in like a COVID world, where everything does have to be digital, social media has really allowed to be basically a platform where people can like digest bite-sized information, educate themselves on current events, and really learn more about the world around them. And yeah, I also agree with the idea that, social media is merely a starting point. I think that, when like we at Dear GENup create our posts, we always kind of have that little like action item slide of what people can do to do more, how, like what resources you can read to learn about this issue more. So I think it's really important for everyone when you're digesting the information that's offered through infographics to take it with a grain of salt and know that like it's really just like a ton of research crammed into a 10 slide infographic, where a lot of the nuances had to be eliminated for the sake of like a word count. So that's also something that I think we all need to like keep in mind, that it's not, the end all be all of your education.
Yeah, so speaking of voices in social media and just general digital activism, this leads me to my next question. Why is it important to have diverse representation in all advocacy movements, digital, physical, etc.? And how does having relatable role models further inspire change in action?
I think having all different voices and perspectives at the table are really important. Just for example, going back to education advocacy, right? Even when you're talking about something as simple as a district committee, some districts have equity committees and other sorts of committees along those lines. Having folks from all different backgrounds and cultural backgrounds representative, and especially uplifting folks that are part of communities of color, I think is really important. And also just, when it comes to that topic of having relatable role models that really further inspire change in action, I think that's the part where kind of student advocacy and student leadership can really inspire other students to speak up and rise up in their district or their communities as well. A lot of times when you see a fellow peer be engaged in their community, a lot of students will kind of join in, and organically a grassroots movement will really start from that. The most basic one that I think of as a good relatable role model, for example, for students in my district is in Fremont, we have a student member on our school board of education, right? And, that individual is, technically the official student liaison for all 36,000 FUSD students. And so I think a lot of students look up to that position and hold a lot of respect for that position. But in return, that student board member has a lot of responsibility to really set a good example for all students in FUSD, but really take action to really inspire change. So I think, just having all the different perspectives and voices at the table is really important. But again, diversity in all types of representation, right? For example, diversity in representation, that also means students who might not be pursuing traditional educational backgrounds, who may not be going on to a four-year institution, right? Or maybe students that are more focused on a career technical education path, right? All of these perspectives, for example, when it comes to talking about making equitable education policy and having that fair representation at that district level, all of those different voices and diverse perspectives really need to be heard. So it's really, really critical in really making change in a community.
I really love this question because I feel like it's very current. I think oftentimes we tend to kind of silo our movements, thinking that we can't all make progress at the same time, and that if we make progress in one area, it's detrimental to another, which is often not true. I think that oftentimes a lot of oppression is interconnected. So if we address something in one area, it can help people in another. The more people we have at the table, the more we can have different perspectives that can help us work towards a more effective solution. In terms of role models, I think that a lot of the organizations that are on this panel right now are role models, having a lot of POC run like organizations like the ones that we're listening to today, or just a lot of them that have emerged in the last couple of months and like the last year, since it's really been a year of activism, I'd say. I think this will inspire more people to want to go into it as well.
How can we continue being impassioned in our demand for policy change and youth empowerment? And personally, what has been your biggest challenge with the pandemic restrictions and how have you overcome them?
When it comes to COVID-19, like it's been at least a year and since the world kind of was uprooted and everything has been in lockdown and quarantined. And so I think that, yes, to what Tyler has said in terms of this year being a year of activism, I think that activism burnout is something that is also really evident and something that also does happen in light of COVID and in light of the fact that we're all socially distant and physically like disconnected from one another. It's really important to be able to find time to do self-care, to make sure that your needs and your priorities and your mental health is, accounted for, and that your ability to function as an individual is taken care of. I think that recognizing the power in the fact that even though we're physically distant, we're still connected to each other is sort of a way in which I've personally been able to overcome the sort of burnout or the sense of, imminent doom and despair in light of COVID.
Especially as many of us are people and women of color, seeing all of this damaging news about what's going on to the people who are part of our community is so painful, and it's just so important to get away. And even with COVID, we can still continue to demand for policy change. Our very organizations exemplify that desire to continue to demand for policy change by the youth, and everything we're doing here is something that we can continue on, because everything we're doing right now will make us better equipped for what's to come next.
Since there has been a lot more coverage on Asian Americans or Asian elders, especially working class ESEA women who have been subjected to violence and hate crimes. I think for me, at least, it was very exhausting to have to see that and kind of be put in a position where because I know that Dear Asian Youth has a platform, I kind of feel this sense of responsibility that we need to be posting about this. So it kind of, I guess I force myself to really tell myself that you need to just process this, and then you have to even though you haven't even really processed all of this yet, you still have to research it, read more about it when you don't necessarily want to anymore, because it's something that you're still processing, and then have to take everything that you've read and turn it into something that you can share with your audience. It's important, especially for us to understand that it's okay to take a step back and to really think through your thoughts before rushing into doing anything else.
What are some of the best mediums to communicate your message and just express yourself to inspire social and cultural change? And how can youth make understanding important social issues transformative?
I think that the arts are huge in terms of just progressing social change and have been throughout history, and especially now. Whenever I thought of activism, strangely enough, I also kind of thought of photography as well. So I've always been really inspired by Gordon Parks and his the way that he kind of portrayed America and also kind of racial divides, the way that he clearly portrayed an image that was really striking, but also really clear and relayed an important message was something that I tried to tie into APC. Kind of keeping that in mind when I guess purposefully going about the use of both art and writing can help to make activism more accessible to people, since people are not all coming from the same background. I think through clearly portraying your messages, that can help allow more people to kind of access that information and make sure that it gets out to a larger group of people that is more diverse.
Something that we do is like making sure that, the font size is like the font type is easily readable, that people who are like hard of seeing can easily digest it, making sure that like the contrast between the text and the background is high enough. I think simple things like that really make it so that we can reach a larger audience. When I first started Dear Asian Youth, it was also like inspired by literature. So it was actually never meant to be an organization. It was just like meant to be a place where I could publish my own poetry. And then I think it kind of spiraled from there, where I recognized a trend in a lot of the things that I was writing, where it was around like my Asian identity. And then I kind of realized that, there wasn't really a place for other Asian people to publish their own pieces of writing.
At the end of last year, at the end of 2020, there was a lot of backlash against our form of Instagram infographic activism because it was seen as something that was so performative. So some steps that Zenerations like ourselves took were that we kind of, when it came to really heavy topics, we would tone down our graphics. We made sure that we were using very simple, just statements that everyone could understand. And we weren't putting in too many art pieces alongside the graphics. We were just putting the text there and the information there. I still think what we do is really important, and art and writing have always been a sort of revolutionary medium because they are liberal arts. And I think it's really important that we just acknowledge that as much as we put all our effort into all of this, we are always like tiptoeing a line of public perception, and our impact is not always our intent. And just keeping that in mind for ourselves is something that's just really important.
Why is it important to put intersectionality into practice to promote opportunities for all individuals and communities in the sphere of social justice, especially in our desire to dismantle systemic discrimination of all forms?
This question reminds me of a chant. If any of you have been to any like protests or marches in the Bay, a really common line is "the people united will never be divided." And I think there's a lot of power to that, because, at the end of the day, like even whether it's education, climate justice, kind of any issues you want, right? A lot of the times the most impacted folks are the folks that are being sidelined, communities of color. And so when folks really work together, it can really create concrete change in communities. And, just on the topic of intersectionality, right? There's all of us have different lived experiences. We come from different cultural backgrounds. We all have our own stories to tell and stories to share. And a lot of the beauty of that diversity, I think, is what makes, California such a special state as well.
Oppression is pervasive, so it just doesn't target one category or one set of identities, but it actually persists across all different identities, regardless of your race, gender, sexuality, socioeconomic status. And every single one of those identities, oppression exists, systemic discrimination exists. And so I think that, like Alvin said, you need to understand in which how every aspect of one's identity kind of coalesces together. And I think that's really important in starting out and doing this work, right? Like understanding how your identity and your positionality is affected by systemic discrimination. For example, I am a Chinese woman. And so the recent shooting in Atlanta against other Asian women was deeply jarring for me. And it was very horrifying and disgusting and traumatic because it made me realize, or, kind of even just like put it into light, the fact that race and gender, specifically my race and my gender, are so interconnected with one another. There's a reason as to why that shooter in Atlanta targeted Asian women. And there's a reason as to why this sort of oppression exists against BIPOC people. There's a reason as to why this oppression exists, not just across race, but also across gender, sexuality, and every aspect of your identity. And I think what's really important is understanding that true liberation, genuine, tangible liberation can only be possible when every single aspect of someone's identity or community's identity is accounted for and represented. So when we're talking about, having anti-racist work, or when we're talking about having education equity or having tangible policies in government, it can't just target one specific group of people. It has to make sure that every single person feels as if their lived experiences and their own personal narratives are represented in the classroom. And that also includes understanding how their lived experiences connect with one another, whether that be race and gender, race and sexuality, sexuality and socioeconomic status, and all of those different facets. And I think understanding that and coming to terms with your own positionality is kind of the first way in terms of, dismantling this sort of systemic discrimination.
When we're not thinking of everyone's issues get swept under the rug, because in order to really dismantle systemic discrimination, we need to think of all people of color, all people of different sexualities, disabled people, fat people, poor people, and anyone else who is at a disadvantage in society, because we cannot advocate for ourselves on our own. We need to advocate for each other, because so many of these movements that we're following the footsteps of have been created by those who were the most disadvantaged in society. And it is up to us to uphold that intersectionality and their legacy in order to create justice, because everyone who came before us was probably more disadvantaged than us because they worked to give us what we have today. And we have to continue that by continuing to be intersectional activists and including everyone in our fight. Everyone who came before us was probably more disadvantaged than us because they worked to give us what we have today. And we have to continue that by continuing to be intersectional activists and including everyone in our fight for social justice.
Thank you. What experiences shaped you into the leader you are today?
Every single person has something to bring to the table. And what's really important is that because every single person has something to bring to the table, every single person has their narrative and their experience and who they are as an individual to contribute to that fight towards activism and fight towards, anti-racism in the classroom. And so I think that in terms of experiences that have shaped me and who I am is that the school that I went to, the high school that I went to is predominantly white. The books that I read were predominantly white. I never saw myself being represented in the classroom. The only history that I learned when it came to Asian American history was about how Asian Americans were oppressed in the United States. And granted, that understanding of oppression is really important, but at the same time, I wanted to learn about how my people were also empowered and also contributed positively to this country. And so I think that not having this experience in the classroom made me want to make sure that other people who looked like me or who didn't look like me had that experience in the classroom and who were really able to feel as if their own narratives and their own identities are represented in the curriculum that you learn and teach and experience. So I guess that's my answer.
So a little bit of a backstory about me. I actually was born in upstate New York, but I moved to Taiwan and then China when I was very young because of my parents' work. And I think that was actually very instrumental in kind of like the work that I do today, because, while I was living in Taiwan and then in China, I kind of I understood what it meant to be like the majority. I understood what it felt like to not have to feel like you had to fight for your voice, to basically just be able to like say what you have on your mind, to be able to enter a classroom and see other people who looked like you, to see an educator who looked like you, and to see role models who looked like you. And I think when I moved back to the States and when I was kind of like immersed in a classroom setting that I hadn't really been in before, that really kind of like showed me, this is what being a racial minority looks like. While before, I didn't have to fight for my voice, I did now. Before, I was able to see people who looked like me in leadership positions, but now none of them looked like me. And I think kind of having those two perspectives and being able to compare one with the other made me realize that this is something that I wanted to fight for, and that I didn't want anyone else to feel this way, because I kind of understood what it felt like both to be the majority and the minority.
I think, Stephanie, your story is something that's so incredible, and I really admire you a lot. Um, I'm pretty privileged actually. I grew up in a town that's predominantly Asian, and I live in a neighborhood where almost everyone is Indian. Everyone looks like me. So I've had that experience of being lucky enough to see people around me who are like me. But just as a kid, I was always really angry and really outspoken. And I think that kind of just shaped me into being a leader because I always like to talk about what I believe in. And just I would see something happening and I really had to have an opinion on it. And because I grew up in such a comfortable area, I was always given the opportunity to voice my opinions. So that really just helped me. And I think I come from a pretty privileged place. So
I feel like I have a pretty similar experience to Kea, but not in the same way. I like throughout my like school career, like I'd always gone to the same like all girls school. So ever since I was 5, I'd been going to the exact same school. And while it was predominantly white, like, and that kind of had its own, I guess, like issues. I think the fact that I was like always surrounded by girls, and like women that were like really high achieving and like determined to try and like make their mark on the world, and the fact that we were always kind of pushed into like leadership positions and like encouraged to kind of share our opinions with the world, I feel like that kind of normalized that for me, to like an extent that sometimes when I would like go to other places or other settings, I'd be like, why are there not like more women at the table, like making decisions and stuff? I think that normalization of like women being, I guess, taking charge and not being afraid to use their voice was really beneficial looking back on it, because I feel like now I have the confidence to go out into the world and make sure that I have a seat at the table and bring other women with me. So I think that that idea of like, I guess kind of similar to Stephanie as well, is kind of being a majority, like in an all female setting for me. And then also kind of having that experience of being a minority, of being one woman, and maybe in like a room of like a lot of men, for example, I think can really inform my leadership and my activism in the future as well.
From my experience, I think I'm someone that really learns from experience. And I think that's something I still really believe in to this day, that power of really broadening your perspectives through really putting yourself kind of in new perspectives and new environments. When I was growing up, I had a really good friend where I kind of saw a lot of firsthand education inequities through. And it's actually because of that friend that I actually spoke at my first school board meeting in 7th grade, and it was on free and reduced lunch. So, after that, when I saw the power of kind of board policy and just advocacy, I saw the direct impact of how it literally shaped people's lives and impacted people's lives. And so that was something that really got me, I think, interested into education advocacy and education policy. And that's something that's really held true for the last 6 and 7 years. And so, it's made me a really strong believer in the fact that, any great leader, I think, is shaped by a lot of different experiences and different things they've gone through throughout their lives. And I think for anyone who's working to really hone in leadership skills or just, life skills in general, I think putting yourself out there in those new environments is really important.
How can I be more involved and share my experiences with the organizations here today?
Zenerations actually just launched our branches program. So you can pretty much start a branch to spotlight Gen Zers in your local area. And we will provide you all of the resources you need to get started and become a voice for change in your local area. So I'll actually drop the link for our branches program in the chat.
Yeah, but for Afro Puff Chronicles as well, basically we have a way that you all can submit your stories, whether that be writing, art, films. We have short films that are submitted as well. Any way that you want to express yourself through art and writing, you can submit them to our website and also our email, and they'll be featured on our website, afropuffchronicles.com. And another way to also get involved with us is by joining our staff team. So we have lots of positions that are available. So you can check that out on our site and also on our Instagram. And lastly, I think just through engaging with Afro Puff Chronicles content on Instagram, you can learn more about us and how to support us.
For Diversify Our Narrative, you can 100% join a chapter or create your own chapter. If you go to our website, diversifyournarrative.com, we have, a bunch of resources on how you can, create your own petition or sign an existing petition on bringing anti-racist, diverse books into your English classrooms. We also have resources in terms of how you can start your own Dawn chapter and make sure that you get connected with your school board, you get connected with your community members, and, advocating towards educational equity and making sure that not only your voices, but your peers' voices and the voices of so many people in your high schools and in your middle schools are being heard. And that, starts at the very core level on a school.
For GENup, similar to Dawn, you can get involved with a local chapter, or you can start your own chapter. Our advocacy is obviously a lot more kind of direct action focused and organizing focused. So a lot of the advocacy you'd be doing if you would get involved are things like speaking out to your school board meetings, getting involved in education policy. We do a lot of things where we host a lot of different forums and talks with a lot of different stakeholders at the state level, a lot of times with different unions like the teachers union and the administrators unions. So a lot of times we'll have students kind of come in and give testimonies on those opportunities as well. But a lot of that kind of filters in through the chapters. So if you want to get involved, just visit our website and join there.
Yeah, for Dear Asian Youth, I think the way that you can get involved right now is also by starting a chapter. We have a chapter program where the purpose really is to bring Dear Asian Youth's mission into your own communities. So, that means focusing on issues that exist in your community or bridging together different Asian identities in your community, kind of creating that network of Asian people, either in your high school or your college or your like local town or city. That's really what our chapters aim to do.
And our next question from Charity is, how can we use social media in a non-performative way? What are some ways that young people can advocate for the oppressed beyond just reposting infographics?
Obviously, I think one of the best ways to use social media is to just use it to spread awareness of events. So if you're planning a rally or anything like where you're going to spread information, you should definitely use social media to get the word out about it. Because if you have an existing platform, you can use it to your advantage. Because I think reposting infographics to your story really is the bare minimum. And just going beyond that in any way possible, whether it's virtual or in person, is just really important. So, yeah.
Nowadays, like someone will post something on their Instagram story and then, a bunch of people just cancel them for, being a performative activist, right? But it's a lot more complicated than that. Again, the two go really hand in hand. Like you can push for policy change and you can do you can advocate for all the policy change you want, but if people aren't bought into what that policy is selling, then it's basically worth nothing. And so if anything, there has to be a really nice mesh of both, which is, on one hand, you actually have to do that, physical organizing and pushing, our government and these different institutions to create that policy change, but you also have to do that cultural part, which is that education piece, right? And spreading awareness. Why is this important? Why do we have to do this? And if people don't understand why and the necessity for it, then that policy isn't really going to be useful.
I think just personally for myself, I think I try and use my Instagram stories to spread awareness as much as possible. And that doesn't even have to be about current events. It could be about little known things having to do with anti-racism or just even I've done a lot of things about history that people don't really know, but that also informs the present, because I think that's really important that people know about these types of things. So I think just thinking about what your specific niche is, what can you uniquely kind of contribute that can educate people that you're passionate about, maybe for example, mine's history, yours can be something else, but I think that finding that thing that can really help to educate others is really important, and that's a unique way that you can use your personal platform.
How can students help their schools expand the teaching of the history of BIPOC in history and social studies classes?
I think that in terms of history, you need to make sure that all history should be, included in the classroom. And I think it also comes from a place of not just oppression, but also empowerment. So kind of understanding how your community or how communities of color have been subjected to centuries of oppression, but at the same time, in spite of that oppression, they've still been able to be, to positively contribute to the United States, or to be able to contribute to their own communities, like understanding the literature and art and just power that comes from these communities of color is, especially just as important as understanding how the United States and how, the entire world has systematically oppressed these communities. Especially in history as well. I think something that Dawn does, or something that we're trying to do, is making sure that the person who is teaching this history is also educated and also understands how to adequately and well enough teach this history, and makes sure that they're not speaking about this history from a racist standpoint, and to make sure that not only are the students getting an anti-racist education in the actual content, but that the educator themselves is also anti-racist. And so the work that we've currently been doing is making sure that we create, workbooks and trainings for teachers themselves in terms of talking about race and racism in the classroom. I'm sure all of you guys have had experiences in which a white teacher has said something, incredibly inappropriate or racist about a certain topic, and it inflicted harm upon the community. And so I think that having those two in terms of a history curriculum is something towards making sure that students' voices and experiences are adequately represented in the classroom.
World history, AP Lang. It's sometimes you just have to be a courageous student, and you just have to ask the uncomfortable questions. If you're in a history class and your teacher is talking about a certain event in history, and you know that your community was affected by the event, try and ask them, hey, how was my community affected during this time in history? And if they don't have anything to say, then that's on them, and it's a learning experience for them and for you as the student, because then maybe you have the opportunity to teach your teacher something. And then after that, they can incorporate it into their curriculum for the following year. And obviously, it's not our responsibility. It is our teacher's responsibility. But sometimes just for that little push, we can take that little step and just be like, hey, can you talk about how this community was affected? If you can't, can you maybe research it and incorporate it into your curriculum? And I think that's just from a student's viewpoint.
Really quickly, one thing I was thinking of actually when Dawn and Zenerations both addressed this was oversimplification, because I know that in my AP US history classes and world history classes, because there's so much material to cover, textbooks literally just write 3 sentences about an issue and consider it done. I think just something that I'd like to put out there is being able to see past that. I know that it's hard, especially because history is supposed to teach you the history you're supposed to know. So sometimes we take what we've learned for granted, and we just think of it like that's the end of my education on this topic. I just think be curious about the things you learn and always want to learn more, because that's just important when addressing important topics like the ones that we've seen today.
They say, I'm a freshman in high school, and as a woman of color, I have been so incredibly inspired and empowered by all the organizations here today. And I want to help educate others about my experiences and make a difference. Where do you suggest I start?
If you're looking for maybe something more personalized, I guess, I know a lot of people kind of have started blogs to kind of showcase a lot of their work or their opinions. You can kind of maybe start an Instagram page of your own, something like that, or your own organization. You can do work through your school, maybe starting a club or organization through your school. I know that there's a lot of kind of local, kind of even political work that you could do as a student. So I think just kind of looking for those options is really great, and you'll be surprised at what you can find or what you can make on your own.
How powerful do you think journalism is within activism? Within the past year, journalism hasn't been as integrated in digital media as of now, mostly because of COVID-19. And what can we do to further use journalism as a tool for activism?
I think journalism is a really important for activism, especially because when you think about it, journalists are on, like, prior to COVID, journalists are the people on the ground. They're the ones doing the field work. They're finding out what's really happening. And I think a lot of journalism these days has become watered down to like these big companies who have their writers, and they have like some big famous writers within their companies. But a lot of journalism has become watered down into this just monolith of corporations. But when it comes down to it, journalism as an activism form is very important because you're getting there to be on, you're in the field, you're finding out what's going on within the community itself. So instead of just taking ideas at face value, you're asking the people who are being affected how they feel about what's happening in the world, and then you are relating it to other parts of history and what else is going on in the world. So I think journalism is just something that's really important, and I'd really like to see like smaller journalism come back, because it's just something that we really need, like true journalism instead of like the big corporate form of journalism that we see today.
I honestly kind of wanted to push back against this question because I feel that journalism is very much intertwined with activism and always has, but not in the traditional sense. Like, I think we all always kind of often think of journalism as being kind of like you're in the newsroom and stuff like that, but I don't think that that's always the case. I think that the way I see journalism is just telling a story. And I think maybe this is because I'm like an artist and stuff, but I think that through activism, we can tell a different story. I think oftentimes through journalism, a lot of different motives are pushed, and people have different agendas on what stories are important and which stories should be shared, and at what time. And I think that through activism, you can often spotlight lots of different narratives that are often underrepresented. And I think through kind of reclaiming narratives and through pushing kind of like voices that are often brushed underneath the rug, I think that journalism can take on a new power through activism.
So, what are the most effective forms of activism, and how can a teenager get more involved in the issues they care about?
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of different ways to go about making change in a community. In terms of uh, more physical, I guess, grassroots ways. Obviously, it really depends on the issue area you're focused on. But I think a lot of people, get really sucked up in like federal politics. I want to go lobby my Congress member, or oh, it's so cool to phone bank and advocate to the U.S. senator from my state, right? But a lot of this work and the things that really impact your day-to-day life happens either at a local level or at a state level. And a lot of the time what the federal government does is pretty irrelevant to how it impacts you on a day-to-day basis. So whatever issue it is that you're passionate about, be it education, go to your school board meetings. If you're passionate about, the school to prison pipeline, speaking out at school board meetings on school policing and SROs is a great way to go.
I think that if you don't really know how to get started, or if you're kind of new to activism, I think that you can maybe think about being a change maker in your community, like being someone that is observant, kind of seeing like what are the problems in my community that I can help change. Like, it can be as small as kind of thinking about what are things in my like local school that need fixing that I can kind of help bring solutions to, or bring kind of new awareness to. It could even be like, what are some things in my like, I guess like community, or even like local household that like needs fixing, or there are other households that also need this kind of like solution as well. I think that just thinking small and then kind of like growing from there can be a really good way to get started. I think activism can be quite simple, and trying to simplify that process can really.
What are some more tips for not burning out?
I can answer this from both an activist point of view and like a student point of view. If you are a student, from an activist point of view, I suggest putting time limits on your social media and news apps, because sometimes you're just so attracted to the thought of just going through and finding out everything that's happening. In addition to that, just like if you start to see that you're spending more and more time like doom scrolling, or you're spending more and more time like getting worried about what's going on in the world, just take a step back, breathe, take care of yourself, talk to someone who has similar ideas to you, talk to someone about how you're feeling, like, hey, this big issue in the world is really weighing down on me. Can I talk to you about it so that I can just get it off my chest? And I think that's really helpful for just trying to like take the weight off of yourself. And in addition to like being a student, when you're a student who's also trying to be an activist, sometimes it just all becomes too much and you just need to sleep a lot. Like if you have a spring break, spend it sleeping. That's kind of what I did. And that's how I recovered from my burnout.